Hello, YouTube. How are you guys? So, I've thought to make this series about H1b visas for a long time. There seems to be a lot of confusion. There is no consolidated information about these visas, how they work, and the questions around them. So, I've tried to make a couple of video series about these H1b visa programs, who they are for, what they do, and how we can benefit out of them. Basically, before understanding what these visas are for, I mean, we need to understand what is the difference between a visa and a petition. Okay. All right. Sorry, that's my pen. So, visa is just something that allows you to enter the country. Okay. So any other visas, H1B visa is also a regular visa that's stamped on your passport. You go to the embassy, you get it stamped. But the only difference is before getting a H1B visa stamp, you need to have a approved petition, okay? Which is in this case called as the I-797. So you will carry this document along with you to the consulate in your country and tell them, okay, I have got this I-797 approved from USCIS, and now please give me a H1B visa stamp on my passport. Okay, so unlike other visitor visas or business visas where you don't do any petition, you just walk into the embassy, apply online. This H1B does not work like that. You need to have an approved I-797 before you can go to the consulate in your country or before you can apply for the physical visa as such. All right. Okay. Now that you understand what is a visa versus a petition, so now we need to understand another important part, which is the fact that this visa, although is a non-immigrant visa, which means this is not meant to immigrate to the United States, but it does have a dual intent. Okay. Now, what does dual intent mean? This means you can have an intention to stay in the United States. Okay, you can have that in your mind. So basically, if you go to the embassy or if you go to the consular in your country and tell them, I have the I-797, give me the H1B visa, but if possible, I would like to stay in the United States. So that is correct, and that is possible, and you can say that at your H1B visa interview. It will not go against you because this visa is a dual intention visa. You can have an intention to stay in the country or you can have an intention to stay in the United States. But for other non-immigrant visas like the visitor visa, if you tell them that you intend to stay in the United States, you will be straight off rejected. Okay. So number one, you need to have a petition. Number two, you can go to the consulate, apply for a visa after taking an appointment. Number three, you can have a dual intention. You don't need to say that, but if there's a question like that, would you like to stay or would you intend to stay? You can stay. You can say that if I like it, I'll think about it, or I want to stay. That will not go against you. Okay, so that's the next thing to remember. Now let us come to the H1B basics. What is it? Who is it for? Who can apply? How to apply? And all those stuff. Okay. So the first thing to understand here is what is CAP. I'm taking you really from the basics, so that you don't have to go through all the information here and there on the internet. You just have to come to one place. That's what my intention is. So what is a CAP visa, a H1B CAP versus an H1B non-CAP or a CAP exempt? Okay, so in the United States, every year they have 65, oh wow, I hate my pen, 65,000 visas to give away. to H1b, and these are called cap because there's a limit, there's a cap that we will only give out 65,000 visas. So for example, in the year 2019, for now, USCIS thought that we have to give away these many number of visas. So they will give out 65,000 new visas. So that's the keyword, new. Okay, people who never held it before, okay. In addition, 20,000 visas are given extra. So these are again 65,000 plus another 20,000 for the students or for the people who studied in US. Okay, so for example, if I'm a person and I studied in the US, so I'm eligible for 65,000 plus 20,000. So I'm eligible for 85,000 or one of the 85,000 visas that I can get if I never got it before. Versus if I'm a person who never studied in the US, has never been to the US, or has been to the US but never studied here, I don't have a degree of United States, then I am only eligible for these 65,000 new visas which will be given out. Okay, so once you understand this part, we can go to the next part, which is called the cap exempt. So cap exempt basically falls under two categories. One is the cap exempt employer. One is the cap exempt candidate. Okay. All right. A cap exempt employer is some non-profit organizations, some special organizations which are working. Basically they are these employers who can hire anybody, and they don't need to go through this cap. So technically speaking, they are very low in number, and 9 out of 10 people do not want this because it's a non-profit or something. You can Google more for a cap exempt employer. So most of us will not fit into this category. Cap exempt candidate. Cap exempt candidate is a candidate like one of these funny guys without eyes. I'll make some eyes here. Okay. All right. So he already got a visa before. He already had a cap visa before. So now, for example, if I got 2019, I got a visa and I was in the cap, then I don't need to be in the cap next year in 2020. I am cap exempt this year because I was already counted in the 65,000 last year. So what that means is, if a new person applies for a 65,000 cap visa in 2019 and he is approved, okay, so that is the keyword, you have to be approved. Your I-797 that we talked about before has to be approved. Even though you do not work for any employer in the US, or even if you don't come to the US, that's fine. But you have to be approved. Once you are approved, next year you are cap exempt. Okay? Because you were already approved once before. So basically US already has counted you into the 65,000 visas that they gave away last year. So they don't need to count you again. You already are in the lottery. Okay? But if you were not approved, you were picked up in the lottery. This is by the way a lottery system. 65,000 visas are given away through a lottery system, which is an electronic one. So yeah, so if you were not approved, then you are not cap exempt. You are again subject to an H1b cap next year. Okay, so speaking of the H1b cap again, I have to tell you that this cap is done through a lottery every year. So this applies only to new candidates, okay, who never had H1b before. So in order for you to apply to an H1b, first of all, you have to have an employer. An employer, all right, petitioning for you, okay? So an employer is going to go to the USCIS and tell them, okay, I have this candidate X. I've got a job for him in the United States, and I would like to petition, or I would like to ask you to allow him to be granted an H1b cap visa, which happens in April every year, by the way. So they're going to go to the embassy, or they're going to go to the uh, they're going to go to the US. Sorry, not the embassy. The employer will go to the USCIS, tell them I have this candidate I would like to hire. And so the important thing to understand here is you need to have an employer. You cannot do it yourself. You cannot go to the USCIS and tell them, okay, I want to work in the US. It does not work like that, unfortunately. Okay, so you need to have an employer. It can be, the employer can be in US, the employer can be outside the US, which has presence in the United States. Okay, so they're going to tell them, okay, I have this new candidate that I would like to like him to work in my US office, and I'm sending you an I-129 petition, which is, by the way, the petition for an immigrant worker. Okay, and then they're going to tell them, okay, I have this in queue, and when you come to April of that year, please consider him for the lottery. So we have candidate number one. Similarly, we've got another company sponsoring another candidate. I've got candidate number two. Similarly, I can have up to 300,000 candidates now waiting in line to get that one of that 65,000 plus 20,000 if you're studying in the US. Okay, so now what they're going to do is they're going to do an electronic lottery system. So they're going to pick randomly out of these applications. They're going to pick 65,000 applications, and they are going to, so this, when they pick this application, it does not necessarily mean that you got the visa. It just means that they have picked your file, or they have picked your case to be evaluated. Okay, so whoever is not picked up, he's automatically rejected, or they don't even look at their case because they were not picked up in the lottery. So now when they pick up these cases, they individually evaluate each case on the basis of certain things that I'm going to talk about in my next session. And then once they approve it, then they give them an approved I-797, and that I-797 is a document that you can take to the consular or the embassy in your country and tell them to give you an H1b visa. Okay, so only after this is approved, you can go to the embassy to get an H1b stamp on your passport. If you're not approved, then you go back to step one, which is go back to the new lottery again next year, or maybe the next to next year. So you have to be approved once. Okay, so the one important thing to note about this visa is, although this visa has up to a 6-year term, they might not necessarily give you for this for 6 years. Okay, it depends on a case-to-case basis. For example, if my employer petitioned for a job for me, I'm a candidate number one, and they told them I've got a job for him for up to like 2 years in the United States. Okay, this can go up to 2 years. This is what the scope of the job is, or the scope of the project that I have for him right now. So they will tell you, okay, you are approved, but you're only approved for 2.5 years. So they only give you an approved I-797 for which is valid for 2.5 years. So what happens is, when you go back to the embassy, they see that you only have 2.5 years approval on your I-797, so they might, or most probably will give you a H1b visa, which is only valid for 2.5 years. You have to re-petition again. But the good part is, after 2.5 years, you are still cap exempt because you have not used up your entire 6-year period. You have only used up your 2.5 years period, or maybe less than that. So you are still eligible for an extension. You're still eligible for a cap exempt petition, which is the good news. Okay. All right, I've been talking for some time, but I have not talked about the requirements or who is it for. So there are two sets of requirements basically. One is from your employer. I'm assuming that we are all talking about H1b cap. or a cap employer, to be specific. We're not talking about cap exempt employers. They are out of the scope of this videos. Okay. And there's an employee or a set of requirements. Okay. So we'll talk about this one by one. Okay, the first eligibility or requirement for an employer is that the job that he's petitioning for or the role that he's petitioning for must require at least a bachelor's degree from the candidate. Okay, so if I'm a company X, I have a role Y. That role Y should demand that the candidate or the person in question should be at least having a bachelor's degree. All right, okay, from US or its equivalent outside the country, and that degree or that qualification should be in line with the role. For example, if I am if I am a engineer, that role should be for an engineer. It should not be for a doctor. I hope that makes sense. Okay. All right. The next is the nature of the specific duties is specialized and is complex. So basically, that it's a specialty occupation job. So the nature of the duties must be complex. That I cannot find somebody to work in the U.S. for this set of requirements. I should be able to prove that, and I prove that through just called an LCA for the job. So, okay, so before even applying for an H1b, I have to have an approved LCA from the Department of Labor. I'm telling you all these things that is because these things are running behind the scenes. This is something that your lawyer is doing, but you should know. This is a good thing to know. Okay, so once your employer will tell its lawyer to petition for you, they are going to go through this process. They're going to go to the Department of Labor and tell them, okay, I'm having this labor condition application, and this labor condition application will contain things like wage, roles, etc., etc. Okay, and they're going to tell them. And by the way, one of the requirements of the LCA is that the job should have been posted for at least 15 days in the premise. So, for example, if I'm a software developer company, or if I am some X company, I should have advertised this job in my office or in the leading newspaper or in a leading job portal, and I have to make sure that I can show that I was not able to find somebody who was able to do this job. So the Department of Labor will now approve this LCA, and now this LCA will be attached to my H1b application, or which is also called as the I-129 application for a non-immigrant worker. Okay, so after all this is done, this will go to the USCIS for evaluation. Similarly, the employee should be having some set of qualifications and eligibility too. One of them is that they have completed a bachelor's degree or its equivalent in a specialty occupation, preferably from a recognized college or a university, or they have some special education or training or certifications or experience that is equivalent of that degree, and they have basically knowledge of something which is very unique and special to the requirement of the job. Okay, so in most cases this requires at least a bachelor's degree, and it also requires a specialty occupation. Okay, specialty occupation means something which cannot be done by a person here in the United States. Okay, so let's also talk about the challenges, the things that most people do not talk about when they talk about H1B visas and all the stuff. So the challenge is for a person who never got the H1B visa or a new candidate. So let us make our new candidate. Let's make him sad because he never got it yet. Okay, so first challenge is that he has to clear the lottery. Okay. Second challenge, he has to find a prospective employer. Number three, he has to have an approved LCA and a prospective employer ready to file his H1 beginning whatever year he's next, the April of that year. For example, if he's in April 19, so he has the whole year to work on that, and by April 1st, 2020, he should be ready with everything in place, ready to file. Okay. Number four is now to be able to find that job that waits for him or her until April. So I have a job today. Let's say I am sitting in July or June and I have a job, but I cannot apply for H1 because I never had it before and I'm cap subject. I'm not cap exempt. Had I been cap exempt, I could have applied at any time of the year, but since I am cap subject or I was never counted in the cap, I have to wait till April. Okay, so that is a very big challenge. Most of the companies you will not find who are ready to invest in somebody or wait for him or her until April next year. For that, they cannot wait that long. So that's another challenge. So these are the few of the challenges that every H1B holder needs to face. Okay, so yeah, you not only have to find an employer, you also have to find a prospect job with an employer and uh, possibly make him wait until April so that he can file your H1B. So what most people do is a workaround. Okay, so this is something that nobody talks about. So the workaround is you keep working in wherever country you are working, in whatever role you're working, and you find an employer who's able to file an H1 for you next year, subject to cap, and get an approval. So that's important. He has to not only apply for an H1, he has to get an approval. Okay, so what happens is when that employer files an H1B for you, petitioning for you, you can be approved. And once you are approved, then next year or in the same year, you can find that dream job that you always wanted, and you can tell them, okay, I was already selected and I am already cap exempt, so you don't need to wait for me until April. You can file my H1B right now, and I can join you within a couple of months. So that situation works. Okay, but the sad part here is, why would this employer invest 5,000 US dollars in somebody they do not know, in somebody they do not actually want to hire? All right, so you have to find an employer. It might not be a very big employer. It can be a small company. It can be anybody who can invest that money in you, however you want it. Okay, so after they invest that up to $5,000, depending on the kind of processing you choose and the kind of employer they are. After they choose that and you get an approval, you actually have an H1 now, and you can tell anybody that contacts you about a job that you already have a H1B cap exempt petition approved, and then they can file or they can transfer the petition the next year or the same year, whatever works for them. Okay. I also want to talk about, all right, another workaround is this guy who never had an H1. Okay. He wants to get an H1B. So what is the other way? Like I said, you can have an employer petitioning for this guy in the coming April. The good news is that many employers can petition for him. Everybody wants him. He's a gem. He can have employer A, B, C, D, E, and so on and so forth. They're all petitioning for him for 5 or 6 roles. So what are we achieving by this? We are achieving, or we are increasing our chance to get picked up in the lottery. So if you're lucky and if you can find these employers, which by the way are many, if you go and look at a website called myvisajobs.com, you can search for an employer. Okay, doesn't matter what kind of an employer is it. Right now our objective is to get past that H1b cap or the limit of 65,000. Okay, you have to get past that so that we can move. But the only problem is the money. Okay, for example, A, B, C, D, E, F, they all apply for H1b, and only A and B get picked up. The rest are not picked up. Okay, so we have to pay the fees over here and you have to pay the fees over here, or we can pay just once. You can pay at A, but if you do not carry your application forward with B and A gets rejected, then you are screwed again. Okay, so you have to go back again. So we're just increasing our chance. There might be a possibility where you pay here, where you pay with employer B, and both get approved. But again, you lose the money because you're not going to work here, or neither are you going to work here, or you might end up working at one place, not both. Okay, if they still have that role for you by April or May or whenever it's approved. But the good part about all this situation is that now, since you're approved, next year you're cap exempt. Okay, so for example, if you got approved in 2019, you applied in April and you hopefully got approved by July, and so September or August onwards, you can apply or you can look for any job and you would be cap exempt. Okay, so now you can start your actual job search from here, and then you can tell them, okay, I have got an approved H1b, you can transfer, you can transfer, you can transfer, you can transfer. Speaking of which, that reminds me that there is nothing called as an H1b transfer. Okay, people call it a transfer, but it's technically not a transfer, it's just a repetitioning, but which is cap exempt. So you go through all the process again, you do everything, you do the LCA, you do the I-129, you do everything, but the only difference is that it's not cap subject. You can apply any time of the year, you don't have to wait till April. So there's nothing called as, technically it's an H1B transfer where, I mean, somebody had already an I-797 approved for you and you started working for somebody else, you got a new I-797, but from USCI's perspective, it is a repetition. Okay. Similarly, when you're working for an employer, you already have an I-797 or an H1B approved, and you have those job roles listed, and you have a location of your job, and you have a wage for your job, and so many other things. If any of this information changes, okay, you have to repetition. Okay, so you have to go through the whole process again, but the good news is you can keep working. Okay, I was working in a role A on a salary X at a location L, but as my journey continued to the company, I started working at a role B on a salary Y at a location, some other location. Okay, but before I start doing that, when I'm at point here, my employer has to repetition, and they have to tell them, okay, now this guy who had this I-797 is now transitioning into this new role. Some people do not do it, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge when it comes to audit, and if somebody were to audit your case and they were to find out that you were not working in the specified role or in the specified wage or the specified location, it can be a problem, not only for the employee but also for the employer. Okay, once you get this repetition approval, you can continue working on the same role. All right, let's talk about I-94 and I-9. So I mean, basically they're the same thing. For I'll just talk about I-94. It's the I-9 is specific to employer, but I-94 is specific to the employee. So you petitioned, you got approved I-797, you went to the consular, you got a visa on your passport. Everything is hunky dory, okay? Now you enter the US. There's this CBP, or the Customs or Border Protection Officer, who's going to interview you at the port of entry, okay? Or at the airport, or at the seaport if you're entering through sea. Okay? They're going to ask you, why are you here? Okay? And you tell them that I am here for work. I have an H1b and here is my passport. You can see it. Okay? And based on the situation, he might ask you a few questions and then he will grant you entry into the United States. Okay? But once before he does that, he's gonna give you something which is called I-94. Nowadays it's become electronic. Earlier it used to be written in the passport somewhere. It's a number, okay? It's just a number, okay? And what it says is this guy who had a valid H1b for up to month or year XXX is permitted into the United States with this I-94 control number. There's something which is called control number. Okay, so you can actually go in online and you can. So basically, this is just a status. It's just your status in the United States. So once you have an I-94, you are set to be in a H1b status in the United States. Okay, what this also means that while after this date, when you enter, you should be getting a consistent wage in line with your LCA, whatever was there, whatever you declared in the LCA. Okay, you should have a consistent wage, and you should not be working for any other employer other than the one specified in your I-129 or in your work petition. So you're only allowed to work for that employer at that location in those roles and responsibilities at that wage. Okay, it's very specific. So if anything changes, you have to repetition, you have to file a change, you have to get back to your lawyer. It's not easy. You cannot be working with any other employer. You cannot work a part-time job. You cannot drive Uber. You cannot, you know, you cannot do anything other than your regular work that you intended to do. It's not that you enter the United States now you can do anything. Okay. So I hope I'm clear here. So we now know that what H1B is, how to apply, and all that stuff that we talked about. So now let's also talk a little bit about the visa interview. So I know that you already have an approved I-797 with you, which you're going to take to the embassy or the consulate in your country, and you're going to tell them, I'm approved by USCIS, so please allow me to go to the United States or give me a visa on my passport. So this is usually a formality, this is just a formality in terms of they want to see how they want to see your face, they want to see they want to make sure everything is genuine. There's nothing fishy going around here, so they just call you to the consulate and they ask you specific questions which are related to the class of visa you're applying. The most common question is what will be your roles and responsibilities. Okay, so a lot of times what happens is somebody else applied, some employer applied for you, he gave that job to a lawyer made up their own story that this is what this person will do, and they got you an I-797. But you, who's the end guy who has to do the job, does not even know what the lawyer told USCIS. They didn't even tell you that. So it is your responsibility to make sure that, you know, whatever roles and responsibilities are called out for that specific role, they were mentioned in your application when the lawyer gave it to the USCIS. Okay, most of the times it's a good idea to just call the lawyer and tell them, okay, give me my I-129, which which lists out everything that they told them. Okay, the next thing is the wage. What is going to be a salary? You should know that, right? And that is a very common question that is again asked in the visa interview. Who's your current employer? So that might be a specific question to you. You might be already working at a company in your country, and that company is now transferring you over, or you might be working for employer X, which you are now resigning to join this new company in the United States. So you should have the answer to those questions. Okay, where are you going to stay? So you have to be, so the basically the idea is you should have the answer to the questions. You might not necessarily have something which is where, so for example, if the consular asks where are you going to stay, I don't know, man, I don't know where am I going to stay. You can say that. You don't have to have an address. Okay, you can tell them, okay, I'll take a hotel, or maybe I'll look around. I'm not sure what am I going to do, but I'm going to stay somewhere near the office or somewhere where my work location is. Okay, which brings me to the next question, which is your work location. You should know the work location. Okay, for example, my work location is going to be Chicago, Illinois, and I'm going to be based out of the street address. If you don't remember the street address, it's fine. You can tell them I forgot the address. It's there in the petition, but I know that it's somewhere near downtown or somewhere near blah blah blah, which is acceptable. Okay. All right. Which next question? Next important question that the visa interview might ask you: who are you going to be accompanied with? All right. So you can tell them if you're married, my wife will go with me, which I'm assuming hopefully she will or he will. And you can tell them my spouse, my children, they will all go with me. So I'm assuming that you are applying for a visa for them together, even if you're not, or even if you are going separately. These questions should make sense, though, or the answers that you give them should make sense. For example, your wife, if she goes for an interview, she should tell them, okay, my spouse will be working for this and this company that I know. She might not know your roles and responsibilities. She can tell them that, okay, I think he'll be working somewhere on this, but I'm not sure. That's his job. I don't know. I just know that I'm going to this place, and we're going to stay with our children or without our children, whatever the case is. Okay. Okay. So the next important part of this discussion is the documents that you need to get a H1b visa. Since I told you that it's a specialty occupation, it requires at least a bachelor's degree. You, of course, need a bachelor's degree of a copy of your educational qualifications, I would say. Okay. Next, if you're going with your spouse, if you're going with your wife, your husband, or your whatever, you need to have the proof of your relationship. For example, a marriage certificate, a birth certificate in case of a child, or a custody certificate issued if it's an adopted child. There should not be any legal problems. They want to make sure. Okay, the next thing that they want is the experience. So since that specialty occupation calls for this experience, you should have that experience. Okay, and you should be able to demonstrate that. They might ask you for documents, they might not ask you for documents, but you should have them ready. Even if you have got the visa and you are traveling to US, you are in the plane, you should have every document that supports your story. Okay, you can be asked anywhere, and trust me, these guys, they are not listening to each other. Okay, for example, a Department of Labor might tell you that, okay, you are good to go. Then USCIS might tell you are good to go. Then embassy will give you a visa. But then when you enter the US, this guy at the who's a CBP officer or a customs and a border protection officer, they can tell you, okay, nobody saw your documents, but show it to me, and I want to see it now. Okay, so these are all, although they are dependent on each other, but they are working independently, or they don't actually. So you can't tell a CBP officer, I already showed my degree to the Department of Labor or to USCIS. They don't care. You should have everything with you all the time. You should be able to prove it until you are at your home in the United States. Okay, so there is no exception. You might not be asked for a single document, or you might be asked for all the documents at all stages. So it's totally dependent on your case and how you support your story. So documents is simple. You got your visa. In the next set of videos, I'm going to talk about the travel and the things you should do once you're in the US, and how you should what you should do to maintain your status around the H1b. Okay, so stay tuned and watch my next video. Thank you for watching.